It is time to talk about the ending of Jujutsu Kaisen. We just had the final chapter in the entire series with chapter 271, and reactions are mixed, and while my feelings towards the overall ending are mixed as well, I think this chapter was pretty excellent. And if you are somebody that absolutely hated this ending, I won't say your feelings are unjustified, because some plotlines in this series did get an unsatisfying ending for a lot of people. And I'll be honest, when I first heard that there were 5 chapters left, I too thought that this was going to be an absolute train wreck. So I was pleasantly surprised by the final chapter, and I think it really tied together the themes of the story and closed out Yuji and Sukuna's character arc in a satisfying way, at least for me. So that is what I'm going to primarily focus on in this video, because that is the most important part of this chapter and the ending of the story. And the final chapter opened up with Megumi, Yuji, and Nobara looking for this curse user, and the curse user turned out to just be some guy that was harassing the girl who was a hostess who he bought a bag for because she wouldn't reciprocate or even remember him. So naturally, when Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara find this guy, they cuff him, stuff him in the back of a car, and Yuji starts to have a heart-to-heart with him. Because this guy recognizes his behavior was juvenile, and Yuji, after hearing this, has a flashback to his final conversation with Gojo, where after the switch training, Yuji wants to swap with Gojo, and Gojo says, "That's fine, but haven't we had enough of Gojo Satoru?" He wants Yuji to be more forward-thinking, and that even if his dream is passed on to his students and he dies against Sukuna, he wants at least one of them to develop strength of a different kind from his own. And I love this scene because we don't see an honest Gojo in this story very often, and the funniest part to me is that Yuji thinks he's acting out of character, because Gojo has so effectively projected this fake bravado personality to hide how he actually feels that Yuji thinks it's the only him. And that is why Gojo laughs at him and thinks he's such a kid, because Yuji is too naive to understand where Gojo is at right now, and that he has the confidence that comes from knowing his role is almost over. And we then get the final words from Gojo in the entire story when he tells Yuji, "I am expecting great things from you." And we immediately get to see how much these words meant to Yuji when we cut back to the present, and when he is trying to inspire the curse user, he tells him the exact same thing. And I think that this was a great closure for these two characters, because it tells us everything we need to know about the impact that Gojo had on Yuji's life going forward, because these words from Gojo have clearly inspired him and they will be with him forever. The next major part of the final chapter is when we see Mahito talking to Sukuna on his way to reincarnate. Now, I was not expecting to see Mahito in this chapter at all, but it does make sense. Idle transfiguration affects the soul, and they are both on the path to reincarnate. I'm not really sure how that works for a curse, but apparently they hit the same purgatory. And Mahito is here for one reason, and it is to call Sukuna out for lying to everyone, and that he was not living according to his own stature. He wanted revenge for being an unwanted child and pretty much given zero love his entire life. And I think that this much was obvious if you just look at how Sukuna was talking to people who even remotely touched on his personal life. Even if you just look at his conversation with Kashimo, he is such a bitter and broken person, and I'm glad we finally get to see him admit it here. And we even see Sukuna in this chapter start to talk to Mahito with the same deflection he has given everyone else the entire series about this topic, where he says, "What's the difference? That's the only manner that I ever knew how to live," before he cuts himself off and says, "No, I actually did have other options." 2 to be precise, and we see 2 figures standing behind him with Urame and presumably Yorozu, because really, who else would this be that's been introduced? Especially considering Yorozu is one of these single-digit characters that has tried to have a positive relationship with Sukuna. But after this, we see Sukuna be honest with Mahito and himself in that he could not help but spread his vitriol or his curse to everybody else. Because Sukuna was always afraid his entire life that his curse would immolate him, and by curse, I think they're just talking about his human suffering. Because that is the great irony of Sukuna here at the end of the story, being the king of curses, is that he was never truly a curse, he was just a man. And he is just as human as anybody else, and I think that is why Gege Akatame decided to bring back Mahito for this final chapter to showcase to us the difference between a man and a true curse. And that a curse is purely negative, it is cursed energy, and Mahito is left sulking in the dust while Sukuna moves on to his next life. And it wouldn't really be a Jujutsu Kaisen video if I wasn't talking about Buddhism, because Buddhism is fundamental to JJK. It is all over the place in this series. And one of the fundamental parts of Buddhism is that you are eternally working throughout all your lives towards finding enlightenment and escaping human suffering. And in the series of Jujutsu Kaisen, a character like Sukuna that turns himself into a cursed object, no wonder Angel says this is against God's law, because they are completely avoiding the cycle that they are supposed to partake in, and that's why I think the final page in this entire series is of Ryomen Sukuna's last remaining finger, because the whole point is that this is now just an empty vessel and he has moved on finally after 1,000 years. And it took him encountering his nephew, the son of his brother, who had reincarnated this entire time. And Blob Kuna completely lied to Yuji, because the moment he died, he says, yeah, alright, I guess I was an asshole. But you know, that is just my interpretation of all of this, and maybe you have your own, and maybe you have a different perspective on the series from this video. If I can make you enjoy it more, I think that's a good thing, and maybe you still hate it. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this portion of the story satisfied me. This is more or less the ending I always expected that Jujutsu Kaisen was going to get, something with reincarnation. I just didn't expect us to get it in Mach 5 chapters. The biggest disappointment for me with JJK's ending is the amount of stuff that either got unexplored or alluded to and then completely dropped. I don't think the story really benefits from that at all. Was the story required to explain all of these things to end? I mean, clearly not, considering the story is, you know, over. But I would go as far to say that the story would only have benefited from having a little bit more time to breathe, and that's where I stand. But let me know what your guys' opinions are in the comments below. I will be talking more about the ending in some other videos because, well, there is a lot to talk about here. And by that I mean there's a lot of controversy, but this is anime, and there's always controversy because we have power scaling. But if you like content like this, subscribe for more. And as always, thanks for watching.